Good morning, councillors, and welcome to the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee of the 14th of February. Happy Valentine's Day, and let me begin by, I know, right, there we go. Committees on Valentine's Day, so romantic. To everyone at home who's celebrating Valentine's Day and has got someone special in their life, I hope you've made them feel awesome today. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to remind members of the committee and the gallery that this meeting is being live audio and video cast onto YouTube, so please mind your P's and Q's. We're going to get straight into... I've received apologies, because for those watching at home, you'll see that this is a pretty light meeting. We have 7 councillors. We're all sitting with our friends. I've received apologies from Councillor Bradley, Mayor Power, Councillor Wilcox and Councillor Russell. Can I please move that all 4 of them are given a leave of absence? Councillor Semp is running late. She hasn't provided an apology. Can I please have someone move that we provide a leave of absence for those 4 councillors? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Seconded by Councillor Karansky. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Now we'll get stuck straight into the agenda. We've got item 5.1, which is the Point Corp residential development application, and we've got, sorry councillors, we have a PowerPoint presentation that the manager has organised. I need it tabled so that we can consider it as part of this report. Councillor Karansky has moved that, and as it is a procedural motion, I don't need a seconder. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to the Manager of Development and Assessment, Mr. Stephen Ball, to present his report.
Through the chair, first of all, I'm just starting at the front of the room because there is a presentation. At the end of the presentation, I'll move to the back of the room where my colleague and I can answer any detailed questions. What you'll see in the presentation, that'll come up in a moment, is just the figures that you'll see in the committee report, and then they're really just up here so that you're not having to look down at your agendas and then look up at me as part of going through the process. So it's just for ease of reference. There's no new information here. So first of all, we start off with the subject site on Green Road. The applicant is proposing to make a change to the planning within our planning scheme. They're able to do that under the Planning Act. The reason that they're proposing to do that is because there is some new information that they have since we prepared our planning scheme. In terms of the way that I will describe this, what is being proposed, I'll focus on the land to the west, which is a residential component, and then the land to the east, which has the employment land. It's easier for me to describe it in those 2 components. Just the next slide. I don't think the click is working. Thank you. So starting with the residential area on the proposed residential area in the west, what you can see is an area in green, which is based on the new information, is the land that both the state and federal government has defined as having the flora and fauna environmental values that need to be concerned. So they're shown there, and is also consistent with the way that we plan across the city to create corridors to allow fauna movement from the in this case from the north to the south. The next slide shows an area of green down the middle of the site. Now this is for the regional detention basin, which is identified in council's planning, which supports the growth of this area. The next slide shows an area in pink in the middle, which is being proposed by the applicant. Now, the reason why that they've defined that as pink is they've looked at the urban form to the north and to the south and to the west, which all shows residential, and they're proposing a residential outcome on the balance of the site that does not have those same environmental flora or corridor values. We then come to the last figure, which I'll now talk about the employment land to the east. So what is changing in this regards is that there used to be in our planning showing an orange area at the northern edge of the site, and then also down the middle there was another orange area which was our mixed use areas, and then the balance of the area was purple. What they're proposing to do is to use the that proposed road down the middle to replace the mixed use area as the buffer to the conservation area, because that was its purpose as a buffer. But retaining the mixed use area to the north, which is the buffer to the residential. This increases the total amount of medium industry land, which is consistent with what we understand to be the desired land use area to support the employment generation in that in the growth area. Officers are supportive of what is being proposed by the applicant in this development. I'll return to the back of the room.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillors, before we get stuck in, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare on this report or the second report today? No? Excellent. Councillors, do you have any questions for the manager? Councillor Lane.
Thanks very much, and I'll wait for him to be seated. Forgive my ignorance, how is a road considered a buffer? A road is a noisy thing. How is it considered a buffer between that and residential? I don't understand that.
Through the chair, I'll just qualify my my earlier statement. So when I was talking about the buffer, there's two components to that. So there is the buffer down the middle of the site, utilising the road, so that new road, which is the buffer to the green area, and then the mixed use area, which is the orange band on the north. That's the buffer to the existing residential areas to the north. That orange area to the north is the same land use zoning as what is in the current scheme. The change is down the middle of the site, where there used to be an orange band, and now that's been replaced with a combination of the purple and the road.
How is it a benefit to the community to take away a buffer that's not a road and put a road in? That's my question. So through the chair, what used to be along that boundary was orange mixed use land, so it was still a form of employment land, and the road is now being used along that area. So I'm a little bit unclear. Oh, sorry, I'm the one that's unclear. How does removing employment land, which was a buffer between heavy industrial and residential, with a road, improve the outcomes for the local residents? I'm just unsure of that. Sorry. I'm not sure how to phrase that. Maybe I'm not speaking in planning speak, I don't know, but...
Oh, okay. Through the chair, sorry, I think I understand your question. So there's the proposed new residential area, the pink. So what there will be is there will be the regional detention basin. So there'll be 150 odd metres of land there, plus the new road, and then you'll have the industrial. So there'll be that 170 odd metres of buffer area.
Stephen, I think, did that answer your question, Councillor Lane? Doesn't quite feel like it. So what Councillor Lane's trying to understand is why Council is willing to accept the road as a buffer when really it's just open hard stand with traffic on it, as opposed to the mixed use as a buffer. Like, why is that an acceptable outcome to the officers?
Through the chair, the green buffered area of 150 metres plus the 20 metres of road is considered to be sufficient buffer to the residential. The mixed use land is just being substituted out for medium impact industry. So we consider that is a sufficient buffer.
So you're maintaining the same amount of employment land, you've just flipped the road over so that you can have medium impact industry instead of a mixture of medium impact industry and mixed use. Is that right?
That's correct.
Cool. Does that help, Councillor Lane? Cool, no problems. Any further questions, councillors? Does the Divisional Council want to make a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm against this development application because it doesn't meet the community's expectations. This development application is about changing environmental zoning. The property zoned for environmental purposes is adjacent to the residents in Carver's Reach, and these residents have a reasonable expectation that their neighbouring environmentally zoned property will remain for environmental purposes. And this DA changes that. It's about housing and warehousing, which doesn't align with what the community thinks is right. When someone buys a property that's bordered by an environmentally zoned piece of land, there is a reasonable expectation that this piece of land will be used for environmental reasons. That's what the families in Carver's Reach did. And cutting down these trees and replacing them with more houses and more warehouses, I don't think that's fair to the residents in Carver's Reach, and I'm against it. I believe that this deal is a bad deal for the families in Carver's Reach, a bad deal for the community in Carver's Reach, and a bad deal for Park Ridge. I'm against this D8, and I believe that it should not be approved in its current state. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Herrmeyer. Do staff want to respond to any of that, or are you just comfortable with Councillor Herrmeyer's position?
Through the chair, we understand the councillor's position.
Thank you very much. Do any councillors have any further questions, or are you happy to put this to the vote? Councillor Brennan?
Just through the chair, Councillor Herrmeyer's got good points on that. So I know you weren't going to speak to it, but what have we taken in? And I believe there's been feedback from the residents that live there, like the fact that they bought that with them thinking it was environmental, and the fact it's changed. How have we explained that to the community? Like, what, as a councillor, how do you sell that when something was there and it's just been reversed? Because that would be a hard sell.
Through the chair, some time ago, officers went out to the site and were there when the developer presented what they were proposing to do. We've also had a number of conversations with residents who've called up and asked questions about the proposed development. In terms of the principle of what they're doing, there's nothing under the Planning Act that prevents an applicant from proposing through an impact assessable application to make these type of changes. They've done that on the basis of suggesting that there is new information since our planning scheme first came into effect. So when our planning scheme first came into effect, as is discussed within the report, there used to be a different way in which council used to take and deal with offsets in the city, and that was through having what was called offset receiving sites. And this was one of those sites that was defined. So you'd collect money and then you would use that to then go off and purchase parcels of land like this. Through the changes to the legislation where offsets are dealt with differently, and a combination of the applicant getting both the federal and state approvals, they've been able to define on this property which is the areas that have the flora and fauna values that need to be protected. And that's what they've continued to show in the green. The balance of the site, because it is no longer, we no longer have offset receiving sites in the city because state policy has moved on beyond that, is really just up for, well, what form of development can go over that site. So that's where we are today. We've got new information that has informed a different form of development over that site than was intended when we first created the planning scheme.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Bennett?
Through the chair, if I could just add to Stephen's comments. Firstly, the land to the east, which is the employment land, the mixed use and industrial, that area hasn't changed under this application. So that was always within council's planning scheme scheduled for employment land. So there's no change by this application. And just in addition to the residents' concerns, the applicant has proposed a landscaped buffer, which has been recommended for conditions within this document to Carver's Reach, which is a minimum of 10 metres wide and needs to be a minimum of 4 metres high before any clearing can take place adjacent to the Carver's Reach boundary. And that also allows for emergency vehicle access to access Carver's Reach from the north in the event of an emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Councillor Ben, do you have any further questions?
I do it through my through the chair. So would your residents, do they know that? They're happy with that, or they're still not happy with it?
Thanks for the question. The feedback I've received from Carver's Reach is that they are against this this development application. There's, of course, different opinions in Carver's Reach. It's not a hive mind, but it's overwhelmingly clear that the majority of residents that I've spoken to are concerned and disturbed by the thought of the forest to the north of Carver's Reach getting knocked down and houses built on it. when they bought into that area with the understanding that that would be a protected space because it's environmentally zoned.
All good, Councillor Bedden. No further questions. I have Councillor Fraser, Councillor Murphy, then Councillor Raven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are a number of submissions about people's concerns and that we're not able to condition the developer or anything around those concerns or anything like that. Is there anything at all that we can do to help the residents out that may have legitimate sort of concerns about some of the aspects of this proposed development?
Through the chair, some of those concerns that were raised initially when the development first came through was that vehicle access would come from this development through Carver's Reach, and that's been resolved through the use of an emergency barrier. So that was one of the concerns. Adam's already spoken to that buffer area between the two, so that will still give those residents that immediately adjoin the site some amenity instead of just seeing houses directly across. As part of the development, the applicant is also proposing to spend a minimum of $500,000 on embellishments in the park, which includes things like a pump track and also some large play equipment, which extends upon the existing play equipment that you can find within the Carver's Reach development. So there are a couple of those areas. I completely understand the concerns from the community because they're seeing at the moment that there's an area that is vegetated and part of it is proposed to be cleared as part of this. So I can understand and empathise with their concerns. We come back to this, the process allows for an applicant to propose these things through the new information that they have. They've been able to define those environmental values across the site, and we're left with that balance of the site, and it's about identifying what the appropriate uses are to occur over that. And as I said in the presentation, if you look at the land to the north, the south and the west is residential. That's the most appropriate activity to occur on that side of the site. And then Adam was saying the area on the east has always been those employment uses, and they're continuing to have those existing there. So there have been some responses to those community concerns, but that general one about retaining it all as green and as forest, that's something that officers don't believe can be overcome.
So if we vote on this, it's either going to get up or it's not. If it doesn't get up, what implications are there for council if it doesn't get approved? Because they've done a lot of work, I guess, getting state and federal approvals and that. If they've approved it, then they sort of trump us often, don't they, or all the time? So what are the implications, I guess, if it doesn't get up?
Yeah, through the chair, officers have been unable to identify any relevant matters in order to support unable to identify any matters to overturn what is being proposed and recommend a refusal. So on that basis, I could see the applicant likely going to an appeal, and council would go into what is a fairly costly process of hundreds of thousands of dollars to enter into the appeal. And as I said, at this time, officers have been unable to find any reason in which we would be able to refuse what is being proposed, and that's why we're recommending approval.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, through the chair. Stephen, thank you for this report. It's very comprehensive. So you've had objections from residents. I believe there's 51 objections here, and of which in the report the council officers have gone back and made comment with regards to those and how the application fits within those boundaries and changes. And the council officers are recommending that this development application be approved with said conditions, correct?
Through the chair, conditions in an infrastructure agreement.
Yeah. And from the site map, I can't seem to find the area, but it looks like at least 50% of this block of land will be retained as green. Is that correct? Or do we have the area of what is going to be residential and what is going to be green? Because I just couldn't quite work it out without the scale.
Through the chair, my colleague will just find that information. But one thing I'll say is, remember the site has the employment land on the other side, so it won't be 50%. If we're talking about the portion on the The western side, yes, that's correct, but it's overall, it'll be 25%.
Sorry, Stephen, I didn't
24%.
clarify there. I'm just talking about not the employment side, just the residential side. From the map that's in our report, it looks like the green area would be approximately 50% of the development. Would that be correct? Or do we have an area that is going to be retained as green?
Through the chair, it'll be approximately 50% of that residential side of the site.
Okay, thank you for that. I think they've done their due diligence, and I'll support the application.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I've got myself and then Councillor Karansky. And Councillor Fraser touched on this, but just to be very clear, Stephen, there's no planning grounds on which to refuse this.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay. So without planning grounds, we end up in an appeal that's hard to defend. Is that right?
Through the chair, I'd say very difficult to defend.
Understood. And I completely appreciate the Divisional Councillor's position. When you have to stand up for your community, it's very important that you do so. I've spoken to the Divisional Councillor many times, and he's told me the concerns, especially from the people who are directly adjacent to this, who had to spend a lot more to build their property because of bushfire risk. And I think they're rightly upset that we're going to take away that bushfire risk, but they still had to spend a fortune extra on building costs for their home. And so I would, if I was in their position, I would feel the exact same way that they would, and I would be doing exactly what Councillor Heremeier is, standing up for his community's interests. So I want to applaud the Divisional Councillor for that. As the chair, though, I'm mindful that without planning grounds for us to refuse it on, we end up in a place where we go to court, we have to defend the undefendable, and we just use ratepayers' money on something that's not going to be effective. And I don't want to see development that makes the community upset, but I also don't want to see ratepayers' money chase good money after bad, trying to defend something that is very difficult or impossible to defend. And as Councillor Murphy says, it looks like they've done their research. The approvals from the state and the feds on the environmental land being so specific makes it very hard for us to turn against those higher levels of government and say, even though you think this is only how much environmental land there is, we want to protect this additional bushland that has low environmental values for the sake of the community, without being able to demonstrate that it's actually got high value to the environment. So while I appreciate your position, Councillor Heremeier, and applaud you for supporting your community, unfortunately, in the interests of the broader community, I can't vote against this one. And thank you, Stephen, for presenting such a detailed report that explains it, because it is a very complicated application, as they often are when they're trying to split the difference on these last pieces of land in a large site. Councillor Karansky.
Thank you. Just reading through the report, so the applicant engaged the ecologist, so we would expect that the ecologist is working for the applicant as opposed to for the broader community, right?
Yeah, through the chair, they would have engaged the consultant. However, there is a peer review undertaken at both the state and federal government level as part of their approval processes.
My experience is typically those who pay the consultant get the preferential position on the consultant's advice. No need to comment, Stephen. That's 51 objections were made. I feel for those residents who bought into this area believing there would be an environmental corridor. Councillor Hall would be well aware with the Bath Scrub challenges around environmental corridor there, and we're holding on tooth and nail to try and protect that corridor, and yet we're actually happy to surrender this one for a developer, is what I'm hearing. I understood that as councillors we worked on the side of the community as opposed to the side of the developer. So what can council expect as a benefit other than pump tracks and sweet incentives to the broader community? We're talking about employment land. What are we going to gain?
Through the chair, council officers' assessment is against the Planning Act, so that's what we've undertaken through the application. So they've lodged a impact assessable application. They've referred to some new information that has come after council has completed its planning scheme, and through that process they've come up with a form of development that they believe is consistent with our planning at the strategic level, and officers can't find any matters to refuse that. So that's our framework in which we make that decision. It isn't a trade-off between community benefit and giving up some of this land. That's not the position. That's not the criteria under the Act.
But that is the decision that we as councillors face, is what's the benefit overall. I note that it's impact accessible, which to my mind means that it doesn't specifically comply with the existing planning scheme. So we're going outside of our scheme to a point to support this one, right?
Through the Chair, the process under the Act requires an impact accessible application for these forms of development when you're looking to make changes to the planning scheme, but it also establishes that under a performance-based planning scheme that there are instances in which new information comes along and that can inform a different outcome than what is in the planning scheme. And that's what's occurred in this instance. And as I was saying before, the officers have evaluated that and they've come to the conclusion that there aren't any reasons in which we can oppose this development, and therefore we're putting forward a recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Stephen, and I have every confidence that the officers have done due diligence. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I just think it's a big city and potentially development might be better located in areas that already support development. So I'll be with the area councillor today.
Thank you, Councillor Kerensky. Councillor Lane.
Thanks very much. Just out of curiosity, and it's something that the Chair raised, which is these people spend a lot of money doing bushfire approved buildings. So they've got a bushfire overlay because of an environmental corridor that will no longer exist. Are we set to review all of our environmental corridors and remove those bushfire overlays so that people aren't spending additional tens of thousands of dollars to improve or build their properties, which could then turn into what is small to medium enterprise business or other housing? Because they're not protected. Is that the case that we will be doing in Logan, or?
Through the Chair and through the evolutionary framework, we're constantly looking at ways in which we can make changes to our planning scheme to respond to new information that comes along. I'd like to say that I can entirely empathise with the situation that those existing residents have. It's a situation I've come across personally myself when I constructed a house within a new subdivision, and as part of that stage I had to pay the additional money because of the bushfire risk through the building certification process, and then later as they continued to develop in that estate, that risk fell away because of a narrowing of the land that was actually protected and conserved for environmental purposes. So I had to pay increased building costs as part of my house that I built.
My question was actually, are we going to review the environmental corridors and whether or not those bushfire overlays are actually appropriate anymore, given that we're actually going to scrap them in favour of development?
Through the Chair, as I was saying before, we'll continue to look at improvements to the planning scheme through the evolutionary framework as a result of new information coming in.
So, Stephen, can you just clarify this wasn't a wildlife corridor, this was just zoned as environmental?
Through the Chair, that's correct. It was originally zoned in this way because it was an offset receiving site under a former set of legislation around how we dealt with offsets.
But it wasn't a corridor, because Councillor Lane was specifically concerned about environmental corridors and wildlife corridors that we'd have all over the city. And one other question, if I build a property next to an undeveloped property, say if I built... Did you want to say something, Councillor Lane? Then you can wait and go through the Chair. If I was to build a property next to, say, an undeveloped property in Park Ridge, and it was heavily wooded, but because there was lots of bushland on there, would I still, even though it's not an environmental corridor, it might be zoned emerging communities or low density res, because of the bush when I build my house, does that mean I still have to do those bushfire standards because it's there at the time, even though it could get cleared like at any point in the future?
Through the Chair, that is correct.
So as long as there's bush somewhere, irrelevant of whether it's protected bush, someone still has to build to that higher bushfire standard because the risk exists when the building is certified. Is that right?
Through the Chair, that is correct.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Just wanted to clarify that. Councillor Lane, you wanted to make a comment? No dramas whatsoever. Does the Director want to comment? You're good. Councillors, do you have any further questions for the Manager, or are you ready to put it to the test? Awesome. So can I have someone move the motion on the screen to approve for the preliminary approval of the material change of use as per mess on the screen. Councillor Murphy has moved. Can I have someone to second that motion, please? Councillor Stamp has seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. That has been, how many are in the room? We don't have 7 anymore, we've got 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Councillors, that motion has been lost. Can I please get everyone who voted against or abstained to raise their hand so I can talk to them? Councillor Lane, how do you vote?
Against.
Councillor Karansky?
Against.
Councillor Hall?
I'm voting with the area councillor on this one.
Against.
Against the officer's recommendation. Councillor Heremiah?
Against.
And Councillor Bannon?
Same as Councillor Hall, against and with the local councillor.
Thank you very much. Councillors, you have voted against the motion on the screen, so you must now put a new motion.
I don't think you have to. I think it's done, isn't it?
No, you can't. So you can't have a failed motion. You have to vote in favour of something. So you have to put a different motion up now.
I'll vote to receive the report.
Okay, no worries. That'll do it. You don't need to vote against, say. You don't need to say we refuse. You just need to receive the report, which means there's no approval. Just trying to clarify that receiving is all you need to do. I voted for it. I'm waiting for a motion for the floor. You've got one, and I'm just checking to make sure it's okay. I'm just trying to make sure that receiving is acceptable. That's sweet. Stephen?
Through the chair, I've just had information from the corporate governance manager confirming that we need reasons for refusal. We can't just receive the report.
So, can you bring up the... I'm happy to help you craft it so that it's got the right language. I just need to understand the reasons. I assume you're going to use the divisional councillors' reasons, if that's what you're supportive of.
Mr. Chair.
Can you bring up the previous one and I'll just modify that one? Yep.
Could we please understand why we are required to not receive this report? I would like some information as to why a motion today of just receiving this report is not acceptable.
Sheree, would you like to respond to that one?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the process from here is, given that the officers have put forward a recommendation to approve with conditions, there's really 2 options that you have today. The normal one would be to move an amended motion to refuse the development application, but to do that you have to include grounds for refusal. So that's a process required by the Local Government Act and by the Planning Act, particularly given that you're voting contrary to an officer's recommendation. The only alternative in this scenario, and particularly noting that we don't have all of the councillors in the room, is to defer further consideration of the report to full council, which would allow the opportunity to develop those grounds of refusal if that's the way that council ends up deciding the matter.
If you're clear on what your grounds are, like if you've got a position, I can write it in, because I'll essentially use the original recommendation where it says da-da-da-da-da be approved subject to conditions. I'll say da-da-da-da-da be refused on the grounds that, and then put your grounds in. So if you're comfortable with what your grounds are, I'm happy to put that in now, because you seemed pretty clear about it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair. I'm against the development application, but what I'm also against is making motions on the go. So I think a good process forward would be passing a motion to defer this to ordinary, so we can get the motions together, make an orderly meeting, and then defer it until next Wednesday at the ordinary council meeting.
Yep, happy to do that. Are you seconding the
I'm
deferral?
actually happy to do that too, but haven't we already put it up to the vote and the councillors already haven't supported it? So,
Yeah, so
you have to move forward now because we've already made a decision. So what will this motion look like?
It'll be deferral. So when a motion fails, then you must put another motion and vote for it in the positive. So essentially, if you vote against the motion that says approve, you must put up another motion that either says we will now take this action instead. Might have been received the report, but we received advice we can't do that. So in this case, the councillor is suggesting that we have an amended motion to defer to ordinary council, or you could put up one that refused it that you voted for, and then include your reasons for refusal. So those are your 2 options essentially, because receiving is not an option here. So we'll put the deferral motion up. Which
You're
councillor,
satisfied with that? Yeah.
Yep, which Councillor Heremiah has willing to move, I take it? And do we have a seconder to defer this to Ordinary Council? Thank you, Councillor Kransky. Just bear with the team while they very quickly and studiously chuck this up on the screen. There you go, councillors. So that the matter be deferred to Ordinary Council meeting held on the 22nd of February for further consideration. So I've got a mover in Councillor Herrenmeyer, a seconder in Councillor Kransky. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously with the exception of Councillor Raven, who votes against. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to item 5.2, which is, do you have any general business for us, Stephen?
Through the chair, no, I don't.
Thank you very much. And sorry, Mr. Radich, the Manager of Economic Development and Strategy, is in the room. Do you have any general business for us, Dave?
Through the chair, no, I do not.
Do councillors have general business for Dave? Sorry, Michael, I'll just do Dave's general business before you get stuck in. You're welcome to come and sit down, though. Always happy to see you. Councillor Lang.
Thanks very much. Mr. Radich, your team went out and did a community consultation at the Croydon Road Precinct over the last weekend, and they did an amazing job. They engaged with the local community and stakeholders. They were warm, welcoming. Their engagement with local artists was absolutely fantastic. The final product that came out of last weekend was absolutely amazing, and people are still stopping and admiring it. So could you please pass my congratulations along to them, and I hope that the future consultations on that specific project go just as well. Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you. I'll pass that feedback on to my team.
Any further general business for Dave? No, great work. Enjoy the rest of your day. Now, the Manager of Health, Environment and Waste, Mr. Michael Asnikar, has item 5.2, which is the repeal of licence applications refusal protocol. Michael, do you want to speak to your report, or is Claire going to take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll invite Claire Moffat, Program Leader, to talk to this one.
Thank you, Michael. Through the Chair. So in 2011, Council endorsed the refusal of licence application protocol. Introduction of the protocol was prompted by a complaint and a subsequent internal review regarding the licence application refusal, with the final protocol reflecting what the findings of the internal review were. In the years following, the protocol has become outdated and out of alignment with contemporary practice. The relevant legislation and local law have decision-making criteria and review opportunities, in addition to Council's administrative action complaints framework. Many of the actions set out in the protocol have developed into our standard operating procedures over time, recognising the importance of keeping councillors, management and our customers informed. Deliberation with the Corporate Governance Branch resulted in advice that whilst it is not a formal council policy, a council decision to repeal the protocol should be sought, and advice from the City Solicitor supports this. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Claire. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Karansky.
Sorry to be obtuse, and I have read this through, but it actually doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand what exactly. I understand that why you want to shift it and the reason for that, but it applies when? In what instances are we using this policy?
Through the Chair, we haven't actually been using the policy, but it would be in the circumstances. So, say for example, a itinerant vending application under Council's local law. If council officers made an assessment and determined that we were going to refuse that application, then the protocol should be brought into play, where the local councillor, the chairperson, executive management and the branch manager are all given a particular report, which is outlined in the protocol, and the customer is written to give them an opportunity to represent themselves prior to the decision being made.
So, because I was reading the report and from what I understand, this is a protocol that has a broad brush. Is that right? Because I note that we talk about city standards and so on, and they acknowledge the protocol, but they're not actually utilising the protocol. So this is actually something that's across council, not specific to Hugh or...
Through the Chair, that's correct. So it's through local law licensing, so local law 9 and local law 12, which is predominantly Hugh and city standards that utilise those.
Thanks, that helps. Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? None. Is someone happy to move the repeal motion on the screen? Thank you, Councillor Lane. Seconded, Councillor Bennon. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any general business for Michael? Michael, do you have any general business for us?
No, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. That brings us to the end of the reports. I have some general business for the Director. Before I get into that, do any other councillors have general business for the director they'd like to raise? Nope, excellent. Dave, I had some glowing feedback about a planning officer in your directorate by the name of Scott Hall. We had a resident contact us. They were building their first home in Bars Scrub, and they had some very painful issues from their builder and developer that was completely outside of control of the customer, or outside of council's control. He was incredibly impressed with how considerate and empathetic Scott was to the situation, and that Scott bent over backwards. There was a very specific deadline that was very short, and that if council hadn't been able to move swiftly to meet that deadline, the builder would have been able to charge the customer penalty fees for not getting their approval sorted out. Your staff member did an amazing job of getting that sorted out in under a day, despite some big challenges. And he just wanted to pass on his thanks and have the staff member publicly recognised, because he thought it was above and beyond performance, and he's incredibly grateful for the money that he saved his family. So thank you. All good? No further GB? Meeting closed at?
Yeah, I have a GB 7.1 on the board.
Oh, thank you, sorry. Do you want to speak to your general business motion, Councillor Harriman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, I would like to move a motion about requesting that we receive some information on the current way council buys environmental offset land, and if any changes can be made. Now, this report's just for information. There's no immediate changes. It's just for information, and it stems from residents in my division who have asked me why council allows so many trees to be cut down by developers for housing and warehouses. And that's a fair question. And when they asked me that, I explained that council has environmental offsets. And the idea of environmental offsets, that when a developer comes and cuts down trees, they have to put money aside that council then spends to buy land to protect trees in the environment. When you look at the numbers, Division 8 has generated $7 million in the last 10 years from environmental offsets. Yet when you look at where this money is being spent, not a single property in Division 8 has been purchased for environmental reasons for over 9 years. Now, I don't think that's how the people in Division 8 expect environmental offsets to work, and I haven't done the full research, but I can only guess that this uneven distribution is happening across the city, not only in Division 8. And the purpose of my motion today is not to immediately change any policy, anything to do with environmental offsets. The purpose of my motion today is only to request information on the methodology used to purchase land, and to request that council officers investigate potential future reforms that could be made to buy more localised environmental offset properties throughout the city. The motion is just to request an information report in a public and transparent way, so I hope it gets support. I'll read out the motion for everyone's clarity, that the Director of Growth, Economy and Sustainability be requested to present a for information report to a future City Planning, Economic and Environment Committee meeting, detailing potential future reforms that would result in a more localised purchasing of environmental conservation properties within the vicinity of where environmental offset revenue was generated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harriman. I'll let the Director speak to the general business item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Harriman. Thanks for the heads up that you are intending to raise this today as well. I guess we had an alternate way that we had suggested moving forward, because the complexity around buying environmental land, putting offsets on land, what we might secure through the development assessment process to preserve that land into perpetuity. There's a lot of moving parts to that same discussion. Our proposal was to bring a councillor briefing in March to educate the councillors around what are all those moving parts, and then if there was still an appetite for a report to come back, that would then be raised and presented back in sort of April, May. The reason for that, I guess, is not only to educate, make sure everyone's on the same page before they consider this type of motion, but to use staff's time wisely so that we're not doing a briefing and also moving towards a fait accompli of needing to bring a report as well. However, I think it's a valid piece of work to do. My preference, though, is to do that briefing first. And if this item gets up today, I guess what we need to consider is whether we would still pursue that briefing as well as a report, or whether we would actually just have that discussion in a committee environment. So we'd be working with the Divisional Councillor to frame that discussion correctly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director, for the answer. I think taking that information that's being prepared for a briefing and putting it into committee is something that I prefer, so it's in a public and transparent way, because people in my division really care about environmental offsets, and briefings are not open to the public. So if that work is already being done, putting it into a committee report, I believe would be better because it's public and transparent.
So the Director said he's comfortable with that, so they'll just shift the work that's being done for the briefing into the report, which is better from a use of staff time as well, so make sure it's efficient and we're not doubling everything up. Are there any further questions on this GB item, either for the Director or the Councillor? Would someone like to second the motion? Councillor Hall has seconded the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Any further general business items? Excellent. Now I will end the meeting at 9:46. The City Infrastructure Committee will begin in 10 minutes at 9:56. Thank you.